Hey, it's Mark here, and welcome to the next edition of the Employee Survival Guide, where I tell you, as always, what your employer does definitely not want you to know about, and a lot more.
We talk a lot about workplace equality, fair treatment. It's a nice idea.
It is.
But if you actually look under the surface, what's really going on, the reality is sometimes pretty different.
Absolutely.
And today we're looking at one of those stories, a legal case. This one really brings some of these hidden problems to light.
It does, yeah. And we're going to take a deep dive into it. EEOC versus Mitsubishi Motor Manufacturing of America, Inc. And this is not just some dusty old legal case.
No.
It's a really powerful example of how we think about and deal with workplace harassment.
Absolutely. And we've got, a bunch of different sources here, the court documents, news articles, even statements from Mitsubishi themselves, plus some research papers to give us the bigger picture about workplace discrimination and harassment.
Yeah. And what we really want to do is pull out the most important insights from all of this for you, our learner. What does this case tell us about what goes on at work? What's the real impact when things go wrong?
Yeah.
And how do we create a workplace that's actually fair and respectful? So let's jump right into this Mitsubishi case.
Okay, so E.E.O.C. versus Mitsubishi Motor Manufacturing of America, Inc. Sounds very, very official.
It does.
But what was the real story here?
Well, at the heart of it, it was a class action lawsuit started by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. We call it the E.E.O.C.
Okay.
They were suing Mitsubishi's factory in Normal, Illinois.
Got it.
And class action, that just means a bunch of people who have all been hummed in a similar way, they come together to sue.
Right.
So the EEOC, they were acting on behalf of hundreds of women who worked at this plant.
Wow. Hundreds?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they were alleging some pretty serious stuff. Sexual harassment that was widespread and systematic.
Right. And when we say widespread, I mean, the sources we've got here paint a really, really awful picture.
Yeah.
Unwelcome and offensive touching. They say sexual graffiti everywhere. Just awful jokes.
Right.
And even worse, women were afraid to speak up because they might get punished.
Yeah.
It's pretty shocking.
It is. The scale of the harassment that they were alleging is pretty staggering. Hundreds of women. And over a long period of time, throughout the 90s.
Right.
This wasn't just a few isolated things happening. They were saying this was just part of the culture at the plant.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine going to work every day in that kind of environment?
It's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
So Mitsubishi gets hit with these accusations. What do they do?
Well, at first they denied everything.
Really?
Yeah, typical for a big lawsuit. They downplayed it. They said it wasn't that bad, not that many people involved.
Okay.
But as the case went on, as more evidence maybe came out, their story started to change.
Yeah, I mean, it did change because this never actually went to trial.
Right.
They settled, right?
They did, yeah.
And for a lot of money, too.
Yeah.
So I wonder why they changed their tune so much.
Right. Yeah, well, they ended up settling with the EEOC for $34 million.
$34 million.
Yeah, massive amount of money. I mean, at the time, it was one of the biggest settlements the EEOC had ever gotten for a sexual harassment case.
Wow.
It really shows you how seriously they were taking it.
Yeah.
And I mean, that sent a really strong message to companies. If you let this kind of thing happen, you're going to pay for it.
Right. Literally.
Literally. But it wasn't just about the money, was it?
No.
Didn't they have to do some other stuff too?
They did.
Like,
I think I saw something about a consent decree.
Right. Yeah, that was part of the settlement, a consent decree. It's basically a legal agreement that the court makes sure you stick to.
Okay.
And this one was in place for several years. It made Mitsubishi change a whole bunch of their policies and how they did things.
Got it.
So it wasn't just, here's some money, go away. They actually had to make changes.
And someone was watching to make sure they did that. Right.
They did. Yeah, they had to have a consent decree monitor, someone from outside the company looking over their shoulder, making sure they were implementing the changes, reporting back to the court.
So they really couldn't mess around.
No.
They had to take it seriously.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure all this had a huge impact on how people saw Mitsubishi.
Yeah, I mean, their reputation must have taken a major hit. A case this big with such serious accusations, that sticks with you. I mean, would you want to buy a car from a company with that kind of baggage?
Probably not.
Exactly. It might make it harder to get good employees, too.
Yeah.
People want to work for a company they feel good about.
Right.
It really shows you that what's going on inside a company, how they treat people, that affects everything.
And it's really interesting to look at what Mitsubishi's been saying lately.
It is, yeah.
Because in their statements now, they're all about positive work environments and diversity. Like they've learned something from all this.
It seems that way. I mean, a lot of organizations, after something like this, they try to make changes, learn from their mistakes.
Yeah.
So they say they're committed to building a better workplace.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing.
Right.
But it's important to remember changing a company's culture, especially after something this big,
yeah,
that takes a long time. and it takes real effort.
Definitely. Okay, so we've talked about the Mitsubishi case. Now let's zoom out a little. Look at the bigger picture of harassment in the workplace, and we've got some research here to help us do that.
Okay.
This first one is called Workplace Harassment, an Organizational Justice Perspective. What are the main points from this one?
Well, this article, it gives us a good way to define workplace harassment. Basically, it's behavior that's unwelcome. It's based on things like a person's sex, race, those kinds of things, and it creates a hostile work environment.
Right.
And what this paper does really well is it looks at how this affects people. It's not just about being uncomfortable at work. It can have really serious consequences. People can get stressed out. Obviously, they might not like their jobs anymore.
Yeah.
But it can even lead to physical health problems.
Wow.
Or it might make it harder for them to get promoted, move up in their careers.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. It really can mess up your whole life.
And it's not just bad for the employees, right?
No.
This article talks about the costs for companies, too.
Exactly. Yeah, it can cost a lot of money. Not just from lawsuits, but when employees are unhappy, they don't work as well.
Yeah.
They might take more sick days. And then there's the whole reputation thing we talked about, which can affect profits. So creating a workplace where people feel respected, it's not just the right thing to do morally, it's also good business.
Definitely. Makes sense. So what's this organizational justice perspective? What's that about?
Right. Well, that's a really interesting part of this paper. They're saying that fairness is really important in how employees experience and respond to problems at work.
Okay.
Including harassment. So they break this idea of fairness down into a few parts.
Okay.
Distributive justice, that's about outcomes. Do people get fair promotions? Is the pay fair?
Okay, that makes sense.
Then there's procedural justice.
Okay.
That's about how decisions get made. Are the processes fair?
Right.
And then the last one, this is really important for harassment. Interactional justice.
Okay.
That's just about how people are treated day to day. Like, are they treated with dignity and respect?
Right.
And think about those lewd jokes and the touching we talked about at Mitsubishi.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't just breaking a rule. It was showing those women that they weren't respected.
Right.
And what this paper says is that when people feel like things aren't fair, they're less likely to report harassment.
That's interesting.
Even if they see it happening to someone else, they might not say anything.
Yeah, I could see that.
So it's really important for companies to have clear policies, rules that everyone understands and that are applied fairly. And they need ways for people to report harassment that are confidential, that people feel comfortable using. And when they do investigate, those investigations have to be fair and thorough.
Right, so people have to trust the system.
Exactly.
Otherwise, they're not going to use it, and the problems are just going to continue.
Exactly. Which brings us to our next source.
Okay.
This one's called Preventing Discrimination and Harassment in the Workplace.
Okay, so this one is more about what companies can do to prevent these problems in the first place.
Exactly, yeah. This one really focuses on being proactive. Don't wait for something bad to happen. Try to stop it from happening at all.
Okay, how do they suggest doing that?
Well, one big thing is training. Make sure all your employees understand what harassment is, what's acceptable and what's not.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then you need clear codes of conduct. Written rules that say exactly what's not allowed.
Right.
And maybe the most important thing, the leadership has to be on board. They have to show everyone that they're serious about this.
Lead by example.
Exactly. If the leaders don't care, then nobody else will either.
Makes sense.
And it won't matter what kind of policies you have.
Right. What about specific training programs?
Right, yeah. So this source talks about bystander intervention training.
What's that?
It's about giving people the tools to step in, if they see something that's not right.
Okay.
Even if it's not happening to them directly, like maybe someone's telling an offensive joke.
Yeah.
This training helps people know how to say something, how to shut it down.
I can see how that could be really helpful.
It can. It's about changing the culture so that everyone feels responsible for making the workplace respectful.
Yeah, okay. So training, codes of conduct, leadership buy-in. What about the law? Like, what are companies legally required to do?
Right. Well, this source makes it clear that employers have a legal responsibility to prevent harassment. They have to provide a safe work environment for everyone.
Yeah.
That means having those policies in place, making sure people know how to report problems, and actually doing something to stop harassment if it happens.
Makes sense.
It's not just a nice idea, it's the law.
Got it.
And the thing is, what counts as harassment, that's changing all the time.
Right.
This source mentions online harassment, which is a big issue now, and something's called microaggressions.
Microaggressions. I'm not sure I know what that means.
Yeah, so those are like little things, subtle things that might not seem like a big deal on their own.
Okay.
But they can be hurtful, they can be discriminatory, and when they happen over and over again, they create a really negative environment.
I see.
So companies have to keep up with all this.
Right.
They need to adapt their training and policies to make sure they're covering all the bases.
So let's bring it back to the Mitsubishi case.
Okay.
How does that whole story illustrate what we've been talking about here with this research? Like the company denying everything at first.
Yeah. Well, Mitsubishi is a perfect example of what can go wrong when a company doesn't take this stuff seriously. Well, that harassment happening for years.
Right.
And them just saying, oh, no, it's not a problem.
Right.
It shows you that if you don't have a good system in place, a system people trust, you're not going to know what's really going on.
Right. And the fact that they needed the EEOC to come in and force them to make changes.
Right.
That says something too, right?
It does. It shows that sometimes companies can't or won't fix themselves. They need someone from the outside to come in and say, this is how it's going to be.
Okay, we've got another research paper here, Sexual Harassment in the Workplace, Developments in Theory and Research. What does this one add to the conversation?
Well, this one really digs into why sexual harassment happens in the first place. And they present a few different theories about that.
Okay.
So one idea is that it's all about power.
Okay.
Some people have more power than others at work.
Yeah.
And they might use that power to harass people.
Makes sense.
Another theory focuses on the overall culture of the workplace.
Okay.
Like, what are the values? What are the norms? Do people feel like they can speak up if something's wrong?
So it's not just about a few bad apples.
No.
It's about the whole barrel.
Right. The environment itself can either encourage or discourage harassment.
That's a good way to put it.
And this paper also looks at how common sexual harassment is. And it comes in all different forms,
Right.
From stuff like offensive jokes to unwanted touching, even to forcing someone to do something sexual.
That's awful.
It is.
And it sounds like it's pretty hard to study this stuff.
Yeah, trying to measure sexual harassment, that's really tough. A lot of people don't report it, and everyone has a different idea of what it is.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's sensitive, it's personal, so researchers have to be really careful how they study it.
Okay.
To get good information.
Last thing, we have those statements from Mitsubishi Motors, North America.
Right.
What are they saying now?
Well, these days, they're really emphasizing their commitment to diversity and inclusion, creating a respectful workplace.
Okay.
Which, after everything that happened, that makes sense.
Right.
They're talking about the steps they've taken to make things better.
Right.
New policies, training programs, things like that.
Right.
And they talk a lot about accountability, making it clear that if you harass someone, there will be consequences.
Yeah. But as we said before, changing a whole company culture, that's not easy.
It's not. It takes time. It takes a real commitment.
Definitely. So putting it all together, what are the big takeaways here from this Mitsubishi case and all this research?
Well, the Mitsubishi case, it's a really stark reminder of what can happen when harassment is allowed to go unchecked.
Yeah.
Both for the individuals involved and for the company.
Definitely.
I mean, $34 million.
Yeah.
That should make any company sit up and take notice. And it's clear that if you want to prevent harassment, you can't just have a policy, sitting in a drawer somewhere.
Right.
It's got to be more than that. You need clear rules that everyone understands, and you need ways for people to report problems that they feel good about.
Right.
You need fair investigations. And most importantly, you need leadership that shows they care about this stuff, that they're going to hold people accountable.
Right.
And those employees, they need to trust the system. They need to believe that if they report something, it'll be taken seriously.
Right. And even when there's a settlement, like Mitsubishi paying all that money, it doesn't really fix everything.
It doesn't.
The people who are harassed, they might get some money, but that doesn't erase what happened.
No.
The emotional damage, the impact on their careers, that can last a long time.
Absolutely. Money can't fix everything. And even if a company like Mitsubishi, they try to make things better, that's an ongoing process. It's not like you flip a switch and everything's fixed.
Definitely. And it's interesting, too, what counts as harassment, that keeps changing.
Yeah.
Like with online harassment and those microaggressions, we have to keep learning and adapting.
We do. Yeah.
And it's not just about reacting to problems.
Right.
It's about preventing them from happening in the first place.
Exactly. Being proactive.
So we've really gone deep on this topic today.
We have.
The Mitsubishi case, all the research, it really shows you how complex this issue is.
It does.
And how important it is to create workplaces where everyone feels safe, everyone feels respected.
Yeah, I mean, understanding this stuff is crucial.
Yeah.
If we want workplaces where people can thrive, reach their full potential.
Right, exactly. And so we'll leave you with a question to think about. After everything we've talked about, what do you think is the most important thing a company can do to stop harassment and discrimination?
Right. Keep thinking about these issues. Pay attention to what's happening around you.
Definitely.
And thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for being here.
If you like the Employee Survival Guide, I'd really encourage you to leave a review. We try really hard to produce information to you that's informative, that's timely, that you can actually use and solve problems on your own and at your employment. So if you like to leave a review anywhere you listen to our podcast, please do so. And leave 5 stars, because anything less than 5 is really not as good, right? I'll keep it up. I'll keep the standards up. I'll keep the information flowing at you. If you'd like to send me an email and ask me a question, I'll actually review it and post it on there. You can send it to mcarui@capclaw.com. That's capclaw.com.